and then obeying Jesus. Because Jesus is about to ask them to do some very mundane things. Hey, you feed them. What, do we have to cook all this? Do we have to go to the villages? Do we have to buy all this bread and bring it all the way back? How do we do this? So it goes on in verse 38. Jesus says, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. So now, another mundane thing that these disciples have to do is they have to go and take inventory of all the food from these 10 to 20,000 people. Now, when I just graduated high school, I went to work at a hardware store. And they brought me in the time of the year where it was inventory time. You guys have to do inventory at your office. It's like that's the week you want to be sick, all right? So if you get sick, be sick during inventory week. And so I was the new guy, so I had all the crummy jobs. So I had to go and I had to count or estimate how many screws were in this little bin. And then how many washers and how many nuts and how many bolts and how many nails. And I had to do all of this mundane, menial task. And I hated it. It really did take a whole week to do all the inventory for this hardware store. Now Jesus is saying to his disciples, go and see out of all of this crowd how much food that we have. So they come to Jesus. It says when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Now, I don't like to read into the Bible a lot, just make it say more than what it says. But as I read this, I was thinking, man, it sounds just like my kids. You know, when you ask your kids to do something where they do not want to do it at all. When you're like, I really need you to go and do this. I need you to obey it. And what happens? What they inevitably do is they fold their arms, their lip comes out, and they start answering in terms like, yes, no. It's not full sentences. It's just like 1 or 2 word answers. They're not really digging it, but they know they're going to get in trouble. So they just go and they say, you know, as few words as they possibly can. So I don't know if that's what it's saying, but I'm beginning to picture that the disciples are saying, really? You really want us to do this? Are you sure? Are you kidding me? So when they found out, they said to Jesus, 5 and 2 loaves. In verse 39, it says, then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So now, what is Jesus asking the disciples to do? To be ushers. I need you to take these 10 to 20,000 people and set them down into groups. What? We got to do all this, Jesus? I want to go do the miraculous stuff. Do a miracle, Jesus. Make somebody, like, bring all your angels in and make them do it. But all of us, wow, okay. We're going to obey because we believe you, Jesus. We'll do that. So they go and they divide up the people and they have them sit down. In verse 40, it says, they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them. So what mundane job are the disciples doing now? Jesus prayed, he broke the bread, and he said, distribute the bread and the fish among the people. So now the disciples are the waiters. They're the ones that's distributing all the food. Now, remember at the beginning I said, the disciples, you guys are disciples, and you're like, no way could I be a disciple. Could you wait on tables? Could you take inventory for Jesus? Could you cook a meal for Jesus? Prepare a meal. Jesus did not say spend 8 months of your wages on one meal, but he said you feed them. So we're beginning to get a picture of the disciples. All that they're doing for Jesus is believing that Jesus' plan is better than their plan. And obeying everything Jesus says, even when they don't understand, even during the mundane things that Jesus is asking them to perform. So the disciples began distributing the bread and the fish and waiting on tables. You see, there's two things that are going on in this scene. Jesus is performing something very, very miraculous. And the disciples are performing something that's very, very mundane. So we have Jesus and we have the disciples. It says in verse 42, they all ate, all of them. How many people? Somewhere between 5,000 to 20,000 people. They all ate and were satisfied. I guarantee you, if you barbecued yesterday, you were satisfied unless you're a bad cook. All right? So yesterday, I was completely satisfied. We ate barbecue for lunch and Mexican food at night. And man, we were satisfied. So it's not just like a little morsel. They were completely satisfied with what they had eaten. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. Now, what are the disciples doing in this instance? They're bussing tables. They're picking up trash. They're doing things that we're like, a disciple has to do that? Man, I thought other people had to do that. No, these are the 12. These are the people who earnestly, vigorously followed Jesus Christ and did all these amazing things that we read about, but we never look at the mundane things that they had to do. And it's easy to follow Jesus when you're up front and you're getting all of this praise and you're doing all of these miraculous things, but can you follow Jesus during the mundane things, when you're scooping poop, when you're washing dogs, when you're washing tables, when you're preparing meals, when you're setting up chairs, when you're working with kids? Can you follow Jesus during the mundane things? If you can, then you're a disciple. If you can't, you got some problems. It says they all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls. These were full of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. So what's the results? Why did Jesus ask his disciples to do all of these mundane things? What's the result? Let's take a look. 5 things I think we can point out here. They're not in your message notes. You can write these out to the side. These are really important. Because of the disciples' belief and obedience to Jesus, the people that received, the crowd received what they needed the most. And what did the crowd need the most? They needed Jesus. And they needed his instruction. And because of the disciples' obedience to Jesus and doing everything that he had said, the people were able to hear the message that Jesus had to teach. Secondly, because the disciples, their belief and obedience in Jesus, the people received the food that they needed. They got the spiritual stuff, the spiritual teaching, but the large crowd also got the food that their body needed. They needed nourishment. It was late in the day. They had nothing to eat. And they physically got what they needed. They spiritually got it because of the disciples being obedient to God, obedient to Jesus. And then now they're getting the physical nourishment that their bodies needed because the disciples were obedient in the mundane things that Jesus needed them to do. Then number 3, because the disciples believed in Jesus, because they obeyed Jesus, the people were served. The people were served by the disciples. They were served so that they could hear the message of Jesus and so that they could see the miraculous things that Jesus was doing. But there's no way they could have done that without the disciples doing these menial tasks, which they thought were menial. But